We're also joined today by our co-founder, Brian. We'll introduce him more in a minute. And we are also being joined by 3 of Cypress's ambassadors. These are people who do amazing work on Cypress's behalf, and we are super excited to having them join us for this event today. And Murat, the background always gets lots and lots of comments here, so it does look like he is in the clouds today. It's delightful. He is joining us today. We've got Karan, who is also joining us. He's a senior test automation engineer. And Walmyr is also joining today, and he is founder and instructor talking about testing. And I know I forgot to give a shout out to Murat's company because I was too busy talking about his background. So Murat is joining us from Extend, which is great. So thanks everybody for joining us, and we can just keep going from here. We'll talk through the agenda, and then I'll let everybody do some more introductions as we get going. So today, we're going to be talking through the recently released Cy 13, which is a super exciting time for us here at Cypress. This is including a high-level overview of the Cypress Cloud, a quick demo of that feature that everyone's been buzzing about lately, and then some essential need-to-knows in regards to that release. Then we will go into the amazing big brains that are here representing our ambassador team that we talked about just a second ago. They will share their firsthand experiences with Cy 13 and just lots of wins they've been having within this release. Then we will turn it over to Brian to talk about the future of Cypress. And then we'll cap everything off with a Q&A from the audience. So we have a ton to cover here. We can dive right in. So let's see here. Jess, if we can go ahead, checking to see if Jenna is with us. I got another message, but I can't tell if it is old or not. No, cool. All right. So let's see here. We can move to the next slide. We can talk through Cypress 13 overview. So let's see here. Perfect. Can everybody see the slides too? I just saw something come up in the chat that the slides seem to be. Is that, no? Is that just everybody? Okay, we got thumbs up. There we go. Perfect. So as a developer, having a robust environment to write, test, and debug code in is essential to workflows. And with the Cypress app, I can get built-in time travel functionality, the ability to inspect and traverse with the DOM, and I can look at network traffic to understand what is happening under the hood. After my local development work is completed, though, it's time to evaluate my code in higher environments. And this is where things become more complex. And on the screen, you're just seeing quick run-throughs of Cy 13 and things. So we can move on to the next slide. Thanks, Jess. All right. So on most teams, merging your code up beyond local environment means executing automated tests in the CI pipeline. When something goes wrong and you need to debug, the experience is much different though. You don't have the same high fidelity tools that you do locally. You lose the ability to time travel, to inspect the DOM, and to dig into network traffic. This means that as a developer, you are looking at potentially spending hours trying to recreate the issue locally. And in some situations, it may not even be possible. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Brian to continue to talk about the Cypress Cloud here and what we are seeing on the screen.
Yeah, see, this is basically just a comparison from where we were prior to the release of Test Replay. As you introduced us, when things fail in CI, it's not a local environment. You're often like a CI environment is like a headless machine, a server in the cloud, and so you can't see what's going on. You don't have access to the internal Cypress debugging tools inside of the app. And so what we're just showing here is before Test Replay, the cloud did give you access and visibility more so than what you would just get from CI. So here we're looking at, some analytics, looking at data like the previous runs of the test, but ultimately like our primary tools for debugging or trying to understand what happened with failures and flaky tests was primarily through a video and through screenshots. That helped you see what the problem was, but it didn't help you be able to inspect anything on the page like you would normally have in the Cypress app. So this is just really showing like what debugging used to be like in the cloud. If you go to the next slide. So now with the release of Test Replay, we are also still here seeing the cloud, except it looks a lot like how the application performs when you're running tests locally. You'll see a few differences, like we've got a scrubber, like a timeline at the bottom, but we have all the tooling that you've come to expect, like you can inspect individual Cypress commands, which restore the state of the DOM. They highlight the elements. We can basically time travel with the scrubber forward and backwards. In many ways, there's, I would say, even better debugging tooling in the cloud now than the local app. And if you'll notice, or I'll just draw on the screen here, since I don't think this GIF goes over there, we're also capturing the network requests. And if you were to click on any of these items, not only would it also restore the state of the DOM to when that network request happened, but we're also capturing like all of the request headers, request body, response headers, as well as console logs that your application under test is emitting. We also have a little attempt switcher over here. So in the case where one attempt failed and another one passed, you can basically just click this button and switch between them, and all of the content will update to help you understand, what was associated to one attempt versus another.
The need to knows about Test Replay and what Brian just showed us, it's available with Sci 13. So do you need to upgrade to Sci 13? Yes. If you want all of these exciting features, that's going to be required. It is Chromium-based browsers only. And we're going to see a lot of performance improvements through this with Sci 13. So super great. Video recording by default now will be disabled. So that is a definite need to know. We've seen that question coming up in our support queue. And the app reporter UI is going to be hidden as well.
So why we're saying this is kind of filed under performance improvements is, if you think about previously to Test Replay, you primarily had screenshots and a video, like those were your debugging tools, but they weren't interactive or inspectable. Those also, especially in a CI environment in which the hardware, the machine's resources are generally much more limited than your developer machine, video recording is an incredibly CPU intensive operation, oftentimes like significantly reducing the overall runtime or performance of the application. So it could influence sort of your tests and even sometimes be the culprit behind flaky tests. Now with Test Replay, because effectively we're recreating that entire experience, like you get to visually see everything exactly as it rendered, but you have now all the inspectability and debuggability, there's no reason to ever have them on both. And even though there is still, somewhat of a performance cost to have the replay behavior on, what we've seen in our internal tests is that it more than offsets the cost of CPUs. So generally, you're going to get a much better debugging experience, and it's going to actually run faster. Now, I think worth mentioning here is that Test Replay is obviously only a cloud feature, but it is included in all plans. It's not a separate add-on. Even the free plan has it. And we disable video recording when we know that that you are recording the Test Replay, but you can always override that and basically, still turn on video recording in the case that you're not using the cloud. And the app reporter UI being hidden is really because the app report, like rendering all the commands when things were running in run mode in CI, also had a performance hit. And because we're recreating all of that in Test Replay, there's no reason to basically pay that performance tax as well. So the overall improvements to turning both of these things off with Replay on is that, you get much higher fidelity capabilities and significantly improving performance.
That was so much better than my just reading from the screen. Thanks, Brian. It's like you're the big brain behind all of this. Very good. Thank you for jumping in and helping there. And I realized too, I never did an introduction of myself at the beginning. I'm now calming down. So here we go. I'm Megan Amos. I'm the Director of Customer Success here at Cypress. And yeah, I'm excited to be here, even though my face is a little red and we're figuring it out as we go. So the next exciting part is we're going to talk to our ambassadors. And I think we're super excited to have them join us on this call. We can talk all day about the benefits of Cy 13 and have Brian explain it to us, and I'll be very excited. But when you get real actual use cases of it from people who use our tools on a day-to-day basis, it's just super exciting. So we're thrilled that they're joining us. We had a really cool call with our ambassadors this morning, so getting to get them recognized and join us on webinars and live streams is perfect. So let's go ahead and talk to our ambassadors. I would like them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about what they do and what they do with Cypress and where they work. So let's start with Murat. Murat, tell us about your role, how long you've been using Cypress, and why you choose to be an ambassador.
I am a staff engineer in the DevX team at Extent, and at Extent, in short, what we do is it's like Apple Care for anything you can buy online. So it's a quite sophisticated system with React front end and AWS back end, very nice stack. And I have a lot of fun here being a part of the DevX team and improving all testing experience for the entire company. I've been using Cypress since it came out. I remember 5 years ago, Ryan had a talk and he was talking about some of these ideas that we take as fundamentals, so they're like stateless order independent tests. And after that, I tried it right after it came out of beta. At the time, I was using Protractor with Angular. And to make a simple selector change was costing 90 seconds or so, because I was on Windows and Protractor wasn't that fast starting up. And I remember we used to use REPL and try to like, hey, is the selector going to work? And I remember my colleagues making a change and then saving and immediately that test running. And I was ready to throw out 6,000 lines of automation and just rewrite it in a few months. And it was worth it. It was totally worth it because it would scale in the future. It would make everything easy for everyone. So since then, I've been using it. We use it at every level of the stack, all the way from down for component testing. We use that a lot for our UI tests. For all our AWS backend services, we use API testing. Lots of UI end-to-end testing too. And we also like the feature of Cypress where you can mark the network. You call those UI integration tests. So anything but unit tests, stuff that don't render into the DOM, or things that are testing your AWS handlers or your Lambda handlers and your Lambdas. Those are not in Cypress, so everything else is in Cypress. So I've been using it all over the place and every day. We love it.
That's great. And I will tell you, when you look up Cypress stuff on LinkedIn or anywhere, when you Google us, Murat's content is always near the top, which is super cool. We're very appreciative of all your work and just really promoting everything that we do. So it's great. Very good. Thanks. We'll jump more into questions with you in a second. Kiran, do you want to join and give us your introduction, where you work, what you do, why Cypress?
Are you guys able to hear me okay?
We are. Yep.
Cool. Hey, this is Kiran. I work at BNZ in New Zealand. My role here is senior automation tester. I work on primarily automating the tests, and the heavy features I use with the Cypress is the end-to-end testing and visual regression testing. So I started using Cypress about 4.5 years ago. Of course, back then using a different tool, and the moment I started using the Cypress, it was great experience, lots of documentation, lots of support, and it is very simple to write tests. And the reliability as well, the flakiness has gone. So when I did the POC, tried on one or two features on the applications, and then realized the great benefits that Cypress could offer. Then I was like, oh, cool, this is a great tool. Introduced it to the organization, and since then started using on multiple projects. Yeah, our stack is heavily on the with the third-party tools and the front-end applications. Yeah, great using Cypress so far, and looking forward to talk more about Cypress 13 soon.
Yes, that's awesome. Very good. Thanks for joining us. Walmyr, you are up.
All right, so hi there, I'm Walmyr. I'm from Brazil, but I live in beautiful Barcelona, Spain. I'm an educator at the moment. I do online courses. I'm a content creator as well, and a mentor. This is what I've been doing this last year, but I've been doing quality assurance engineering since 2004, so almost 20 years of experience in the area. I discovered Cypress in the end of 2018, reading one of these contents like write your Cypress test in 5 minutes, and I was able to do so. And I kind of got impressed because I was used to other testing frameworks before that. So from that moment on, I decided to read the whole documentation, which was already huge at that moment. And at that time, Cypress was still in beta. I decided to be a Cypress ambassador because I love documenting my learnings and sharing them to the broader community. The first client of my own content is myself, but I discovered that by documenting my learnings, when people ask me questions, I don't need to answer them again. I can just simply give them a link to a blog post or a video that I have recorded and things like that. And yeah, that's a little bit about myself. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. And I will say too, I know that you have quite a few courses and educational things around Cypress in multiple languages, which is amazing. So we are very appreciative there too. Awesome. So let's move on to some questions for our ambassadors with in regards to Cy 13. So Walmyr, you're up first. What did debugging look like for you before test replay?
Yeah, so debugging is like when I was writing tests or changing some tests, I would have a local environment up and running. I would write a test and then it would work as I would expect. And so I would push this change in a specific branch to GitHub or another provider like GitLab or any other. Usually I use GitHub. And then CI would be triggered and it would run the change, the tests and any other stuff in the CI environment. And in the CI environment, you would have different things happening because in my local environment was already up and running and everything. And on CI, you have to bootstrap the environment first, wait for it to be responding, and then you can start running your tests. And then you would see that the task that you have written locally, it would sometimes fail in the first try on CI and then pass in the second one, which means that you would have an non-deterministic test, a flaky test. And in these cases, I would have to go back to my local environment and try to reproduce the issue that I haven't been able to reproduce when I created or updated the test. And the way I would try to reproduce the issue locally, if I can share my screen, this will stop other screens, so I think I can do it. Let's see. So what I would do locally, can you see my screen? Yeah, so what I would do locally—
currently empty, so if you have multiple screens.
Is it empty?
It's a beautiful
Okay.
desktop background though.
Also, I think I shared the wrong screen, sorry. Let me share the correct one. Where is it? Share screen. Should be this one here. Can you see a blog post on how to run the task multiple times with Cypress to prove it's stable? Yeah? Yes. All right, thanks. So what I would do locally is what I share in this blog post here, and I can share the link right after in the chat. So one of the nice things of Cypress is that Cypress packs together with it other tools that we developers are used to use, and one of them is Lodash. So I would do something similar to that. So imagine that this test was passing locally and it would be non-deterministic on CI. So I would have to go back to my local environment and I would wrap my test, my it block between cypress.load-times, and I would rerun this test with like, I would change the number here to a number that would make sense, 10, 20, how many times I need. So I could try to reproduce the issue locally. So this way I don't need to run and rerun myself. I can simply wrap it on cypress.load-times and I would put a dot only in the test. And when I hit the rerun on the Cypress app, it would run as many times as I put the number in here. But the problem is that sometimes I wouldn't be able to reproduce the issue still, because as I mentioned, in my local environment, we would have more computational power. And so I would actually, first of all, I would look into the stuff that Brian mentioned before. I would try to look into the stack trace, the screenshots, and the videos to see if this kind of artifact would help me identify what was going on. And if not, then I would come to my local environment and do this stuff. But sometimes I wouldn't be able to understand exactly what was going on. So I would have to go back to CI, rerun, and see if it would pass or fail. And then with the information that I had in hand, try to understand what was going on. And flakiness can happen because of many different reasons. It can be because locally things run faster and elements show up in the screen faster. On CI, they can run slower because you have less computational power. So there are many techniques that you could use to make your tests more stable, like waiting for elements to be visible before trying to interact with them, intercepting requests and waiting for the request to be responding with the status code that you expect, so you would be able to continue. Yeah, that's more or less what it looked like. And nowadays, I don't need to come back to my local environment. I can just open test, replay the test that has failed, look into this stuff that I would try to look locally and understand what's going on, and think about solutions to solve the issue. And one thing that I encourage people to do is that this thing that I just showed you in the blog post is something that I encourage you to do before you push your change to the remote repository, right? Test it many times in your local environment, or even push this to, if you don't have like retry enabled, push this to GitHub or to whatever provider you use, to see that if you run your test 10 times, it will pass 10 times. And if it doesn't pass the 10 times, then figure out what is going on before you make it part of your main test suite.
Yeah, that's great advice. We appreciate that. So Karen, we're going to switch next to you. Can you talk to us about how much time you are saving when debugging?
And Karen, before you jump in, I just want to do a quick time check if we can, just from the technical issues at the beginning of this call, if we can keep our answers from like 2 to 3 minutes or 3 to 4 minutes, that would be superb. Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Jess.
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of the time, I think if we take before test replay in the Cypress world, what we usually do is run in the CI, and as Murat and as Walmyr and as everyone just alluded to, the biggest challenge is when it fails, bringing them and then running them in the local. Also, with the big organization, what could happen is that you are behind so much of network, so much of firewall, so much of rules behind, and also the way application behaves. So when with the test replay, that brings to one point that all of a sudden you just run the test and then you pull it. Once you log in, you have everything to time travel and then see what exactly has happened. Even in the CI, it is not reliable. Even in the local, it is not reliable. So it is a huge time saving. Depends on number of tests each of us have, but where I have tried it with about 25 tests, and the time saving is about 3 to 4 hours, depending on the issues it has. and also the flakiness it got. So the great thing with this is two parts: the Cypress as a starting point on whole, how it is contributing and helping us to write the test, and with the newly added feature test replay, I think it is gonna save lots of time, and then it's a peace of mind as well. Like every time, the biggest challenge we get is every time we run the test, they are failing in the CI. Why? So I think the answer is here now with the test replay. You go and then check it up in the Cypress cloud and inspect step by step, and then see where exactly it has failed. Also, it saves time to, we don't have to run locally and then figure out what's going on. I think it's a massive saving with the new Cypress test replay here.
That's awesome. Thank you. It's exciting to hear that we've got people out there saving a ton of time with this addition. It's great. All right, we're going to move on to Murat. Murat, you have a lot of thoughts around this Sci 13 and everything, so we're going to stick to one thing. How has test replay impacted team collaboration?
You said a difficult question for me. So at extent, the culture we're trying to push is you write the code, you test the code, you deploy the code. So it's quality ownership. So when we have that, there's so many services, everybody owns their service, no problem. But we have these UI applications that many teams may be contributing to, and they're making a change and something unrelated is failing. And it may be failing because of another portion of the UI application or for another service. When everything comes together, it's natural that you have 1,000 tests, one of them doesn't work right? So previously what used to be is that they would send a notification, you would pull the repository, install, run the test. If you're lucky, try to reproduce this locally. Maybe you may wrap it in Cypress times like Walmyr was showing, and it reproduces like that. And you're at least spending 5 to 10 minutes trying to diagnose something, just reproducing it before understanding the reason of the failure. But with test replay now, skip all that, right? You're immediately saving at least 5 minutes. You're immediately observing the story behind the failure all the way from the beginning to the end. Maybe you're seeding some data with the API. Did that match what you saw in the UI? Yeah, full observability, right? So a modest estimation that I think you're saving about 60% of the time. And that makes the team collaboration, the quality ownership so much easier, because instead of, hey, something didn't work, people can go exactly see, hey, it only takes 3 clicks. Oh, I can do that. Oh, I have everything. Okay, guys, in this service, there's this issue going on. Can you please take a look? You immediately get to the source of the problem, and that reduces friction.
Yeah, that's awesome. I
And,
love.
and if I could add one thing to that, is that now that Cypress replay is a thing, you can easily share the link of a specific task replay to your colleagues, and they can just with one click see what is going on and help you out.
Yeah, that's outstanding. Team collaboration is so important and time saving as well. Perfect. All right, we have one more question for the ambassadors, but I'm going to ask them in the essence of saving time here to put it in chat. So if each of you would share any best business practice recommendations for Sci 13, that would be great. I'm going to ask you to put it in chat. Thank you so much for your insights with Sci 13 and your work around it. We really, really appreciate it. And currently, we are going to hear from Brian Mann, our founder, about the future of Cypress. So, Brian?
Yep, let's go ahead and start sharing. All right, future of Cypress. Cool. I'm excited to talk about what we've got going on behind the scenes and what we're working on through the rest of the year. So thanks for handing it off. And because I know there's a lot of people on this call that may or may not have deep domain experience with the cloud, but hopefully you have had a chance to use the app. I really just wanted to take a moment to set up some context as to where we're headed and start by looking at the landscape today. So, if you're a developer or QA engineer, you're no doubt familiar with our open source app. Of course, it's where you write and run your tests. And, we've spent many, many years, multiple teams of devs over here trying to build a better test runner, right? We have, ever since day one, focused heavily on the developer experience, making it easy to use, giving you and providing visual feedback with the test code, the commands that you write, and providing a lot of tooling at your fingertips to help make it easy to debug when things don't go according to plan. And with all of that, power at your fingertips, I believe we've made it much easier to write automated tests from where we were, several years ago. And with that, it's enabled you to build up a suite of tests. And the whole point of writing automated tests is, of course, to go and integrate Cypress into your CI pipeline. And that is where you would today connect to our cloud. Now, our cloud is going to help you and your team manage your tests by focusing on things like smart orchestration. A few different aspects of smart orchestration is, parallelization and load balancing. Basically, we help dramatically reduce the runtime of your specs and reduce the overall, wait times on every single push to CI. And we have a bunch of tooling to help you calculate the right number of parallel machines, as well as there's sets of configuration options to do things like automatic cancellation when a certain number of failures are received from within your run. And of course, the cloud also extends the tools to help you detect and debug failures and flaky tests. We offer a set of integrations with GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, like PR statuses, PR comments, and of course, things like Slack and Microsoft Teams to help basically syndicate out those results so that when things fail, you'll get notifications in your chat tool. And of course, as you'd expect, analytics and reports to help your team manage the quality of your tests, right? And, while we've spent years developing the open source application, there's still plenty more for us to do that's, currently on our roadmap. And I just want to highlight a few things that we're currently working on. Over the last few releases, we have been focused a lot on performance improvements. There's kind of a long laundry list of things for us to do. And, we're knocking them out one by one. And of course, there's always still more improvements that we can make. We talked a little bit about them as part of the V13 release with regards to test replay, turning off the reporter UI, turning off video by default, et cetera, et cetera. I think if you've been a longtime Cypress user, you're probably happy to hear that we're also adding multi-tab support to allow you to test multiple tabs or windows at the same time. That's been a long requested feature of ours that we are focusing on. And in addition to that, we've got a few more features in the cloud that focuses exclusively on test management. We've got branch review. And today, when you make commits into CI and we capture what happens in the run, we already give you information like how many tests failed or how many tests were modified or changed. But the latest branch review feature that we have coming out, instead of it doing commit by commit, it's basically a branch-based workflow. So if you're submitting a PR into GitHub, which is backed by two branches, instead of seeing the incremental changes commit by commit, you often want like a summary view, like an aggregation of all that information. And this is basically going to help your team see things like, well, did we introduce any new failures, or did we reduce the number of failures by looking at like what the counts were at the end of the last branch, the base branch versus the branch that you're comparing to. And we do the same thing for added tests, modified tests. This will help you see whether or not you introduced new flaky tests or whether you resolved previously flaky ones. And branch review is actually about to release as a public beta in the next couple days. You can actually opt into it right from within your cloud organization settings if you want early preview access before it's fully GA. In addition to that, in fact, Walmyr, I didn't know you're going to share that blog post, but in fact, and I'm glad to hear that Test Replay has helped you debug without having to basically run the test a whole bunch of times. I have a lot of thoughts on that. There is a feature that we've been working on for a while now. It's been super gnarly to get the logic exactly right, and we're calling it burn-in. And burn-in is actually built to effectively, proactively address exactly the root cause that you were describing. Burn-in is basically an intelligent system that uses just-in-time signals from your test. So because the cloud is basically capturing all the history of the tests, we are building up like this big map of understanding, when it was created or when it was last modified or what its, flakiness has been historically across different branches and everything else. And burn-in is basically a system that will use various signals, like if the test is new, it effectively doesn't have a history. So we don't have like sort of any trust built up, and it will automatically run the test, effectively retry it multiple times, because today flake detection works when a test both passes and fails in the same run. Basically, if you provide a test the exact same amount of inputs, if it's able to reach a different outcome with the same inputs, then that effectively means it's non-deterministic. The problem, though, is that if you have a flaky test, that means that it can both pass and fail. A test that fails multiple attempts is not flaky at all. In fact, it is broken. That is a signal for you. You must go update, the test code or the app code, because you can retry it, to the heat death of the universe, and you're still going to get a failure. It's only when it can potentially reach a different outcome when it's flaky. And the problem is, though, is that if your test just so happens to pass because it is flaky, that means that you're not going to actually pick up that flaky signal. And so we use basically the historical context of the test to inform whether or not it effectively needs to rerun. And the value of this, or coming out of this feature, this is going to greatly improve like flake detection. It's going to eliminate like accidentally introducing flaky tests, because oftentimes, you're running in CI, it's passing your branch, then it merges into, the default branch, but then it sort of like a hidden grenade goes off, and everyone else has to inherit this problem and track through it. And more often than not, like that's why flaky tests don't ever get resolved to begin with, because they're both passing sometimes and then they're flaky later. But with burn-in, it will effectively, or it will consistently identify flaky tests, and also prevent you from ever introducing them in the first place, because that's the best moment to actually address them. And I think that, along with test replay, as you mentioned, they complement each other. Test replay is all about helping you understand the source, the why behind something, whereas burn-in is really about identifying something, because you still need it to show up as flaky in order to then go off and investigate debugging it. So those are a few different features that I'm excited on, that help round out sort of our test management solution in the cloud. But in today's talk, and what I'm really excited to be talking about here is, there is a set of things that we are currently focused on that I find to be a much more valuable destination that we're headed towards. And with the release of Test Replay, we've architected that solution and put ourselves in a really unique position to move beyond just test management. And I believe that we can do this in such a way that naturally extends the value of the test to include measuring additional dimensions precisely about your application's quality. So the tests really, like they're a driver to explore your app. They're a set of instructions, like a unique contract between every user and the Cypress framework. And really, that, I think, gets at the heart of what testing is all about. We already know it's an essential part of the software development lifecycle. It enables us to continually make changes and to scale our code and scale our teams and our services. But I think we all recognize that developer time, whether it's an engineer, QA engineer, is incredibly expensive. And to that point, we believe that we can take the exact same test that you've already invested in, that you've already written, and to dramatically extend the value of it, while simultaneously enabling many more stakeholders, whether that's other team members or other roles, whether it's a product manager, a designer, or engineering leadership, and provide them much greater visibility into extending that value of the test. And with that, we are looking to be able to answer many more questions besides the one that we do today. So, Cypress, whether it's end-to-end testing or component testing, it's really all about ensuring or validating that your application's code functionally works, or at least it works to the specification of the test code itself. But really, that's just one dimension of quality. And, there are still many open questions that are important facet of application quality, whether or not, you've even thoroughly tested all that can be tested in your application, or the way that components or pages visually look, or, if accessibility is important to you, how accessible your HTML and your CSS is, or how fast your page loads, or even, are you introducing potential security vulnerabilities or anti-patterns? And so this is not an exhaustive list, but these are just a set of questions that I wanted to surface because I think they are important dimensions of your overall application quality. And this is the direction that we're heading in. Like, we would like to answer as a company the ability to surface these that give you this feedback on whether things are getting better or things are getting worse. And, besides just actually measuring these, like, surfacing a bunch of facts is important, but it's way more important to do this in such a way that it works for your team's feedback loop. And the goal behind this is that, after every commit or every single PR, we not just surface these, but we also connect the history of them and show whether or not the dimensions that you care about as part of your application quality are actually improving or getting worse over time. So that's kind of a quick overview of some of the areas that we're headed in. And for the rest of this talk, I'd like to focus on exclusively these key areas. This is what we've been working on alongside of Test Replay, and it's the three things that all map to individual questions I just showed that we're working on through the rest of the year. So let's spend a few minutes digging into each area. Start with visual diffing, and you may or may not already have experience with visual diffing, but visual diffing is simply just providing feedback on the actual visual changes prior to merge or deployment. And if you're doing visual diffing of your components or your pages, then that gives you this great hook into being informed about specifically what did change. But if you're observing all the surface area of your system, you're also getting just as much value from automatically being able to understand what didn't change. And that's what leads to confidence, after all. If we can be sure that whatever changes we're introducing did not have a visual effect, then we can merge it confidently. And if they did create a visual effect, well, those can be automatically surfaced. Application surface area is enormous and it's only ever increasing. And so pinpointing exactly where the changes are helps you immediately, locate those, coordinate with a designer, or ensure that, those were the actual visual changes that your team intended. And so just a quick example of this is just a page from our cloud application. Let's just imagine in the first commit, this page looked like this, and the second commit, it looked like that. Of course, with all things visual, when you lay it out like this, it's kind of hard to tell. Like, can you spot the changes? Well, it's much easier if we look at it this way. And in this case, we didn't make dramatic layout changes, but we did change the header and the font sizes. And this was an intentional change. But, with a visual diff, you'd get something that looks like this, that very specifically calls out what that visual difference is and makes it really clear as to what actually changed. Now, visual diffing, the way that I explain this is visual diffing today reminds me a lot about what testing was many years ago, before Cypress, in the sense that we all knew how important testing was. Everything was the industry was shifting left. Developers are under more and more pressure to continually release and get out changes. We had small distributed teams, and software is always evolving. So testing has always been the bedrock or the cornerstone that has enabled, the proliferation of, being able to deploy every single day. But, years ago, the tooling just wasn't there. The web had evolved, and writing a test often was harder than actually building the feature itself. The tests weren't reliable, and really that undermined the promise of value of testing. And in many ways, I see visual diffing suffering from many of those same foundational problems as functional tests. And I called a few of these out. The first is that oftentimes, like, even though a visual diff comes from your code, because there's no real collaboration with the testing framework, that leads to a lot of brittleness and a lot of a large learning curve as to how to get dependable screenshot diffs. If we kind of double click into this, you'll see this is some of our own test code, and the developers themselves have to be aware of when to take a visual diff, right? Like they have to, you know, pick or insert it directly into the code. Usually, you know, you're basically mutating your application, you're performing a series of actions. And so there's going to be multiple state changes throughout the course of an individual test. You have to drop in a visual screenshot, which doesn't sound so bad on the premise, but now multiply that by hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of tests. And effectively every developer has to kind of be aware of every pre-existing state of your application. There's lots of times you can take duplicative screenshots that have effectively already been covered, or, you know, maybe you're not adding as much coverage. And because, you know, your visual coverage is only as good as how much of your application you've covered, it really relies on everyone of your team, like knowing the best practices. Like I think Walmyr, you also mentioned things like guards, like adding assertions prior to things happening, so that you can basically ensure that the page is ready for that visual diff when it's when you've inserted into your code like this. And what I mean by this being like how testing was many years ago is because a visual service that takes a snapshot at that exact moment, you can almost think of it as like an assertion that doesn't retry. Like a lot of, you know, Cypress's magic was predicated under creating like deterministic and reliable results. And, you know, using a modern JavaScript framework, the DOM is very unstable. It's always re-rendering, and getting if you wrote an assertion that didn't retry, it would force you would have one shot and one shot only to nail the state of it. And that means that everything has to be coordinated and synchronized for that assertion to be correct. Well, that is incredibly difficult. It's a huge, tall ask, which is why we, basically invented automatic retries for all assertions, so that even if the state isn't perfectly ready at that moment, it eventually reconciles and it passes. I mean, to humans, we're talking about milliseconds, which is nothing, but to, a machine, whether it's 1 millisecond off or not, like you're going to get a pass or a failure. And that's what a huge source of brittle, unreliable tests were. The problem is that visual diffing is exactly like that. It's going to take one snapshot, one state of the DOM, which means that unless it is perfectly ready for that, you're going to get a lot of false positives, which, just like back in the day when we had unreliable tests, it completely undermined all of your confidence in them. You basically stop ignoring them. If a portion of your visual tests are failing every single commit, like, what's the point? It could be a real change, it could be an unintended change, or it could be just flake. And you basically stop ignoring it, or you start ignoring it at that point, and it really loses all its value. Everything I just talked about was instability flakiness. I forgot to move the slides. Basically, I was just saying that is the primary challenge of visual diffing. That is just tons and tons of instability and flakiness. Simple example of this.
Brian, sorry to interrupt. Just a quick time check. We've got a few minutes remaining. I know that we could probably talk about this all day.
We can. Okay, I will try to hurry up. Do we have like a hard stop in like 3 minutes?
I mean, no, but no, technically not. Our planned session ends at the top of the hour.
Okay, well, this is a recorded video. If you have to drop, you can drop. We'll be posting the video on YouTube later, but I will try to speed up. Okay, in this case, I just wanted to basically show like this is a real scenario. And even though we're only focused on a portion of the app, you'll see that all that's changing is just like one little animation. But of course, that comes out as a visual diff. So this is exactly like what I was basically describing with instability and flakiness, right? And finally, as I mentioned earlier, because this is oftentimes sprawled across multiple services, even though the visual diffs emerge from the test code itself because it's across different services, you lose a huge amount of history and context. You don't have a nice dependency graph between the tests and the diffs, and it makes you, much easier to see like holistically what the system is doing. In this case, like this is an example of Percy. Percy's not a bad system by any means. It does suffer from the problems that I just described, and they have a very similar data model in that, like for every commit to CI, you get a build, but you don't have any of your test information in here, and so you're still having to go across multiple systems. And I say all of that because that really sets the stage for the specific opportunities that we have at Cypress to really address these things, just like what we did for the test runner side many years ago. And the idea behind this is that we are attempting to build the system in such a way that does not require any code. There is no side visual diff, which puts us in a position where we effectively can never miss. Like all timing issues are naturally eradicated. And of course, bringing the diffs together under one system just means that we can provide a lot more historical context and network effects of integrating all the systems together. To give you just a simple example of what I mean by this is that this is just basically like pseudo test code as if we're testing like our little example application Sci Heroes. Let's just imagine, where I'm not a logged in user and we want to, assert on a list of heroes and want to make sure that you can't hire a hero unless you're logged in. Well, with the system that we built with test replay, because test replay is predicated under basically capturing every single state change and surfacing them up, without writing any single code, like we would produce for you 4-page states, like the initial loading screen when the heroes, before they were loaded, the list of heroes, the modal when you went to go hire a hero, and then the error message requiring you to log in. And if we look at another set of pseudo tests, like assuming I logged in as an admin where I can create, edit, or delete heroes, our system would automatically discover all of these page states. So this is what I mean by this will just happen as a natural side effect. You don't write code. That means you don't have to plan. You don't have to organize. We effectively just automatically uncover every single state of the application. And of course, the ones that are important to you that you decide to keep, those then become the diffs or the page states that we then start diffing against. And like I said, this would basically eliminate all the sources of the brittleness, the flakiness, the instability of other existing systems, all by basically just naturally extending the value of the test. Like this is what we mean by you've made this investment. There's a whole heck of a lot more things that you can do with it without changing a single line of code. This is not the limit of our ambitions. I do expect that we have the ability to do even more things. There's a little probably in the future, but not only can we basically automatically do the diffs, but we can use your tests as a signal because they're basically expressing like how to navigate your application in such that we can basically build up, an automatic tree of page states and even show the relationships between them. And this is what we mean by, or this is what I meant by, not just extending or enhancing the value of the test, but making what the testing system is doing more broadly visible to other stakeholders throughout your team, effectively, for free or just basically as part of the test running. Two more things I want to talk about: interactivity coverage and accessibility. Not quite as detailed as visual diffing. So real quick, what is an interactivity coverage report? It's like code coverage. Code coverage is one of the few objective metrics that we get from testing, but it's very pessimistic. It doesn't really tell you, nothing is guaranteed to work if you have 100% coverage, but if you don't have 100% coverage, there is definitive risk. So it's a very pessimistic report, and it's really only understandable by developers. What interactivity coverage is basically taking that same pattern, but pivoting it into like a 3-dimensional overlay, like a heat map. layering it on your pages, which pages are your application. That's the thing that everyone is building and working on, and it's pretty ubiquitous and universally understood. The value of this is basically looking at what your tests are doing, looking at what you're testing, and ensuring that everything that was interactive was actually interacted with. This not only informs you where you could have missed something, but because we have this nice dependency graph between the tests and the elements, we can even tell you like when things are tested, more than once or more than 20 times, where you're just basically doing the same thing over and over and over again in every single test, and you're not actually getting more coverage out of it. You're kind of just wasting time, and that's a great signal to basically consolidate your tests. So really, all of this, the pattern is just that we want to be way more objective with delivering these results, and reduce the burden of testing, make it less of an art, more of a science. This is a quick example. Like, let's imagine, like, I've got this login screen. I've got 4 buttons on it, as well as an anchor link. And in my tests, first thing I do is I visit this page, and then in test 1, I interact with 1 button, test 2, second button, test 3, the third button. What that would mean is that from an interactivity coverage perspective, if we graded or ranked or reported on this page, the login page, we would say that, like, hey, you've got a 60% element coverage because you covered 3 out of 5, but you missed 2. We can even tell you like what test did what with that element, giving you that dependency graph, and giving you a score for this page, as well as all pages, the same way that we're detecting things for page states for visual diffs. These are low fidelity wireframes. I'm really just putting this out in that, like, this is not, a long-term kind of like, we want to eventually go do this. This is something that we're working on and have been working on all throughout the development of Test Replay. These are just low fidelity wireframes, but I wanted to at least transpose a little bit from my Google Slides doodles into like helping communicate how we're actually planning to release this. Initially, it's going to be like a new tab as part of every run. So with every run, you already get information about what happened with the test, but these new application quality dimensions we're going to be releasing on site, so that effectively every run is measuring, not just how your test did, but aspects or dimensions to your application quality as well. And of course, these will be interactive, and you'll see this introduced throughout things like branch review that I talked about earlier, so that when you make a PR, you can see like, hey, did my interactivity coverage go up? Did it stay the same, or did it go down? And basically the same thing for accessibility. I know that if you're an organization that cares about accessibility, this is probably already near and dear to your heart. We also know that not every application or every organization or team cares about this. We also believe that, like, oftentimes it's because, like, you have to do a ton of work. These are not readily available. They're not readily surfaceable, and there's no reporting, there's no history, there's no context. And so our hope is that, by introducing this and making it much more visible, it'll just make it much easier to, to care about this and to improve these types of things. And then, repeat against every, application quality dimension that we intend to extend into. And so the goal behind accessibility scores is that, just like with visual diffs or interactivity, you don't have to write any code. This is basically a report that is going to be automatically scoring accessibility violations for each individual page state that we detect. Obviously, why this is super valuable is because now you have an extra very objective metric for how accessible your website or application is. This will enable your team to track and measure incremental improvements over time. And just like with interactivity, this is currently something in development, and some general wireframes. You'll see these on the runs. We'll basically group or break down the individual page states by URL, and give you a few different ways to traverse into the reports to basically see, each individual page. And, one thing I wanted to point out, like, this is, just using like our real world app and the sign in. I mean, this is the same thing powering Test Replay. So there are times where we'll take an image, like for image diffing, but there are also times where we're just going to surface and rehydrate the DOM the same way as Test Replay, meaning, like, if you popped open your dev tools, you could fully inspect this page. Like, it's actually real. It is exactly what your application rendered as when you were testing it at that time. And that gives us, incredible flexibility to, draw overlays or coordinate or basically make things interactive across all of these various dimensions. These are the final slides, and I just want to kind of show, a narrative around like pulling these all together. In case you're not familiar with the cloud. Cloud is all based on, integrating CI. So it's run by run, commit by commit, or build by build, all the same thing. And so like how this is meant to come together is, imagine like on the first run, you had a test that went through some login page. We're gonna visually detect this. We're gonna surface this as a detected page state, with a URL. It'll, map back to the tests. And then, for each new application quality dimension that we explore into, effectively, we're going to be automatically giving each individual page state a score. In this case, let's just assume the accessibility score is 75%. And I wrote a test that visited it, but it didn't interact with any of the two interactive elements, like the email and the password. So it means the interactivity coverage was 0%. And of course, there wasn't any visual changes because it was brand new. It was first detected. And then in the second run, like you updated your test code, you went through and interacted with those two elements. So now it scores 100%. And let's say you also made some changes to the application code and improved its accessibility. And this time we know definitively, comparing to the previous run, that there weren't any visual changes. And then in the third run, let's just say that you changed the button's background color. Well, accessibility score didn't change, interactivity score didn't change, but now there are visual changes. And so, basically repeat to infinity for, every dimension that we are, planning or expected to, extend the cloud's functionality to cover. So I hope that makes sense. That's all I've got for the future of Cypress.
Okay.
Jess or Megan, do you want to?
I'll go ahead and wrap us up. Thank you so much, Brian. Lots of excitement in the chat for these features. I know everyone has a lot of questions, but stay tuned. We will certainly be providing a lot more information about all this as we get closer. All right. So if you want to speak with a member of our team about Cypress Cloud, I'll leave this on the screen for a minute here. Cypress Cloud does have a free tier just to, explore the features yourself. Test replay is available there as well. So I'll also drop a link to this in the chat. Wanted to share out some resources. So we've got our documentation and a migration guide for Cypress 13. You can find those both there. And then there's a couple other resources surfaced by Murat and Walmyr. Just some things that they put together. So when we send out the recap email that it will include the recording of this presentation, we will include links to these resources there as well. All right, and then lastly, again, we've been saying it throughout the chat, but if you have any specific questions about Cypress, if you want to just connect with our team, connect with other Cypress users or our ambassadors, Murat is all over this. Please join our Discord and we will see you there. So, and lastly, we do have a program called Cypernauts. So this is for super users. It's a great opportunity to test out kind of early beta features before they're generally available. So we'll also include information for how to join Cypernauts in the chat and in the follow-up information. So with that, I'll go ahead and close this out. Thank you so much to everyone. Lots of technical difficulties today. Goodness, Zoom was not smiling upon us, but big thanks to all of our presenters. I did a great job rolling with it, and really fantastic seeing everyone. And yeah, thank you so much, y'all.